All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Pre-Sales Unplugged, the Leadership Playbook. I'm Arvi Karkanji. I'm the founder of Elite Talent, and I primarily work with SaaS companies to help them hire top-tier pre-sales and post-sales talent. But as always, today is not about me. This show is about giving leaders the ability to share what they're doing behind the scenes when they're building and the strategies that are literally working in today's market. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. One quick note you should know before we jump in is that these conversations are live and intentionally unedited. So what you hear here today is completely real and exactly how it happened. We stream it live on LinkedIn, but you can also catch your replay on our podcast across Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever it is that you listen. And of course, if you do get value from the conversation, just make sure to follow, subscribe, or leave us a review. I personally read every single one of them. And on top of that, I always make sure that if you have any questions for the guest, that I can tag him or her and make sure that I get your answers. But with that being said, I'm super excited today. I'm joined by Ori. He's somebody with a very strong track record in this space, especially in pre-sales. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to dive into your story today and our topic and just really talk about your point of views because you have some really good ones, especially right now with the way the market is. So thank you for joining me.
That's great to be here. Thank you for having me on. I'm very excited about this conversation. I actually followed a bunch of your posts and podcasts before and really wanted to get a crack at coming on here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, by the way, for following. But I'd love to get started with a little bit of your story. How did you get started and end up in this wonderful world of pre-sales?
So I always knew that I wanted to go into computers. Actually, my dad was a big computer guy. I was born in Israel. I moved to the States when I was like 1.5. My dad got a software development job in the States. And so I grew up there. I went to university there, and I just kind of always knew that computers were for me. There were computers in my house all the time. I loved playing computer games. I mean, I was drawn to the computer screen. So then I thought I wanted to be like a developer. And actually, I had kind of a critical moment early in my career where I was looking for my first real job. I had some internships and I wanted to get like a developer job. And I interviewed with a company. I made it all the way to the end. And the recruiter called me to be like, listen, we're not going to give you the job, but I wanted to offer you some advice that I don't think you should be in development. I don't think you want to be staring at a screen, not talking to anybody for 10 hours a day. And he suggested consulting. So once he did that and I kind of looked into it more, it kind of took off from there. And then because I wanted to be very technical, especially early in my career, it just was a natural place for me to go in pre-sales. And I worked for a bunch of big consulting firms early on in my career for over a decade. And it just kind of worked. It found me, I guess, a bit naturally, but it was a good place for me to begin my career, I think.
That's so cool. And by the way, so nice of that recruiter to just give you some advice. And obviously it led to where you are today. Were you upset you didn't get the job at this time? And you're like, oh no, I'm not even going to do it. Talk about consulting.
It was in Chicago. I really wanted to go to Chicago, and I had friends there, and they brought me out for an interview, and I spent a day. At this point I'm like a young kid, like 22 years old. I get put up in a hotel, they flew me out, so it was nice. And then I didn't get the job. It was very disappointing. But after I got over that, it made me realize that consulting was cool and a good place for me because I need change as like a constant in my career. So with consulting, it was project-based. I learned a lot about business. I learned a lot about a bunch of different types of businesses, a bunch of different types of solutions. I ended up finding my way into SharePoint, which makes me feel really old to say that. So if anybody knows what that is, they're probably old like me. But from there, it kind of eventually got, I spent like 5.5 years at Deloitte. I spent a few years at Capgemini. I ended up moving to Israel actually for a consulting gig as well. And then I started my own consulting company in Israel and did that for a few years, which was fun. But it also made me realize that, I kind of felt like I was at the end of the line with consulting and even with the pre-sales aspect of it. And I didn't really want to push for like a partnership. I didn't really want to run my own company anymore. So I actually kind of found my way into a sales job with a startup. I mean, it's Israel, right? Startup nation. So I kind of found my way here, and it has been it's been a career revival. I feel like it's not that I wasn't doing great before, but I feel so much more energy and motivation and drive in the kind of the startup world, and I absolutely love it, and I love what I do, and it's we take that for granted because when you don't really love what you do, it's really hard to do a good job. So if you don't believe in it, it's really hard to kind of put out good work product and adequately service our customers. So it's been a wild journey, but it's all about the journey. So I'm very happy with where I ended up.
I love that. And I think it's honestly part of the reason why I'm such a big believer of like everything happens for a reason. It's kind of funny, you get disappointed at the time, but when it leads to this and now you have the full picture from then to now, you're like, it was meant to happen. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and most recently in the current company, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you built the EMEA region from the ground up.
Yeah. So,
yeah. Sorry. No, I was just going to say, I'd love to understand a little bit, how you got the current job, what led to growing the region, and where'd you start to where you're at right now?
Sure. So, like I said, I kind of needed a change in my career, and actually I was working at AWS at the time. And, I felt like I had worked for big companies like almost my entire career. I had this stint where I had my own consulting firm, but I was still, my customers were big customers, and I was working on teams within those customers. So it still felt a lot like I was part of the big corporation. And then I realized that, one, I didn't really want to be necessarily hands-on technical, where I'm actually like building things, which is something that I like doing early in my career. But at this point, I didn't really want to do it. And, AWS as a pre-sales person, you're building stuff like almost on a daily basis. So I got a few kind of, when you work at a company like AWS, a lot of recruiters reach out to you because they want the people that work there. So I had some opportunities at some other large cloud companies like Microsoft and Google. And then I had a recruiter from Silk, from this startup, that reached out to me. And, I was just like thinking like, I'm like at this place where I just don't know what to do with my career, like where I want to go. So I'm thinking, why not give this startup a shot? So they brought me in originally to be the pre-sales kind of leader in the Israeli market. And once I was here and, I kind of understood a little bit more about startup life and started, most of my management and leadership was in the States, like the head of sales, the head of pre-sales. They were all, the global head, the global VPs, they were in the States. We did have like executives here in Israel, but it made me realize once I kind of became trusted by the company that there's so much more opportunity outside of just the Israeli market. And it made sense to kind of go after that. So they let us run with that. And I was paired early on with a different salesperson. And we, kind of came up with a plan of attack to go after the EMEA market. We leveraged the alliances and channels and kind of opened it up. We got a pretty big customer that we expanded significantly pretty quickly. And the rest is kind of history from that perspective. So it was cool because I really got to build out this sales motion from scratch in a territory that was, to be honest, it was new to me. And I think going through the shock of, like, I'm Israeli, I was born here, I speak Hebrew, but moving here was a major culture shock for me. And
really,
really, I one of the biggest surprises of moving here was how much I felt like I stuck out early on. So it helped me though understand, that cultures differ, and when you sell to different cultures and different countries and different places and people, you kind of have to adjust for that. So it was just the right time in the right place. And when I think, especially with startups, like when you show initiative and creativity and curiosity, then you earn trust by kind of doing the job. Like no one at a startup, no one cares about, were you in the office at 9 and did you leave at 5? It's like, are you getting it done, right? Because that's what we need. So once I got through that, and then the kind of realized the sky was the limit. I mean, I'm really driven to win and like very competitive. So so I think that helped me as well. But it's really been an awesome experience, and I have learned an incredible amount in the 5 years that I've been here.
Okay, I have so many questions, so I'm gonna try to speed through them. But first of all, how cool it feels like, at least from what you said, it's like the recruiter or another one has helped you shape the career again into like something, that maybe at the time you didn't really know you needed, but the opportunity showed up. And that's part of what I typically say is like, even with when I talk to talent and they're not super interested, you just never know when the opportunity comes and when it's the right one. So it might not be the right timing for you, but at the end of the day, are you going to let it go or switch and, kind of fall into something that in a way was meant to be? And then from there, I wanted to ask in terms of the culture shock part, how did you learn to deal with different cultures? Like, I feel like even in Europe, let alone the US, it's like completely different types of buyers. How do you navigate that? How did you learn it to begin with, or any big mistake that you made that, made you realize how to fix it?
Sure, and I've got a great story about this actually. So I think before I tell you the story, I think there's like a couple things that matter a lot. One is like going in with a heads up. This is not my culture. I do not necessarily understand them in the way that I think that I do, and what I might communicate might be absorbed differently than what I intend. So you have to kind of open your eyes to that, and when you do that, you can do research and ask the questions, and then you make sure that you communicate. You make sure that you understand the response. Like, it seems a bit silly, right? We take it for granted, but if the person you're talking to doesn't understand what you're saying and you think that they do, you're in a place where you're never going to make progress. So I think that's a big one. And I mean, the second is honestly experience, right? Like, trial and error. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have it not work out every time. Learn from that and then, improve. And that's where you get the experience part. And so like the story that I love to tell about culture shock in Israel is like, I am early days, like I'm, speaking Hebrew all day, and I've never been more mentally exhausted than I am speaking Hebrew. Like, I thought I knew Hebrew when I came here, and my Hebrew was not good. So I'm in a room for this meeting with a bunch of different leaders, all Israelis, Hebrew speakers, and they are yelling at each other in Hebrew. And I speak loudly, right? They're yelling. They are yelling at each other, and I understand maybe half of what they're saying, but it seems very contentious. And like in the middle of the whole thing, the main guy, like the senior person, he stops and is like, Oli, do you want us to speak English? Like, we can all say, I'm thinking to myself, like, well, I'm going to tell all the Israelis to speak English with me just because I'm there. So it's kind of funny. And then after the meeting, I stayed after and I asked the guy, I'm like, so that was a bad meeting, right? Like, that was really bad. And he's like, no, like, we got so much done. My terrible Israeli English accent, right? He's like, we got so much done. It was so productive and everybody was good. And everybody's like hugging and kissing afterwards and talking about their kids. And part of the Israeli ethos, is like to just get it all out, to be very direct. Like, there's a saying, right? If you get two Israelis in a room, there's three opinions. So,
that's hilarious.
It's just, it was jarring, but it was also like eye-opening because, hey, this communication is okay. People don't really make it so difficult. And in the States, that would never fly. Like, you raise your tone in iota and it's very taboo. So, you got to kind of learn, you got to be able to, swing with the punches and be audible ready, to use a sales term, right? To not assume and to kind of go in heads up. But I think it builds character, to be a part of different cultures and to kind of be successful. It's good. It's good life experience. It's good sales experience. It's good.
Yeah, that's actually so funny. So I'm originally from Albania, and my dad's always been an entrepreneur, and he's owned his own business his whole life, at least since I have memory. And every time I was around him, he or business meetings, whatever, they would always like yell at each other. and I'd be so uncomfortable. And it was all like when we'd end, he'd be like, yeah, it was a great meeting. And I was like, what just happened? So that's so funny that you mentioned that. And it's kind of like similar culture in that sense, but I totally understand it. I don't know if I prefer, well, I've been in the US for like 15 years now. I don't know if I'd prefer one over the other, but I worked with so many Israeli companies and I always appreciate the directness. At the end of the day, they'll tell you right then and there if they like it, if they don't, or, if they want to move forward or not. And I'll take that any day, other compared to like other ones. It's like, yeah, this is great. You'll hear from us. And then it's nothing happening.
Yeah, totally. I
So,
like the directness too. I think it's better to
yeah,
know kind of where you stand. But there's lots of great things about American culture too, and
yeah, for sure.
I love them both. I'm a child of two worlds, I guess.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, with that being said, I'd love to jump into some juicy pre-sale stuff. I know you have a really good opinion when it comes to SEs becoming like really important enterprise sales cycles. So obviously you've talked about that. I know you wrote an article. What do you think is like driving that shift?
I think that like nowadays, especially with the advent of AI and LLMs and the availability of information, I think that back in the day, like, so I've always been in sales in some respect, even in consulting, right? It's relationships, you're selling projects, you're just selling services versus a product. But there was always an aspect of kind of trusted inner circles to get information. People relied on, I think, relationships more in terms of someone that I trust that's going to sell something that I should be interested in. So I'm going to, leverage this person that I trust to see if this might fit me. I think now you can get so much information about something so quickly and so easily, and you can be so much smarter, so much quicker. If you're not really using these AI tools, you're missing out, right? There's also a lot of hype around this, and I'm sure we'll get into that too. But so I think the fact that the buyer is actually smarter, has better information, has the ability to do research, makes it more difficult because you can't just I said in the article, right? The good old boys club of sales, I think, is dead. And I think, people don't have time. And so they don't want to, like, a lot of times people don't even want to go out to like dinner afterwards. They're tired. They want to go home, see their family. Like it's not really the same world. And I think because the sales are becoming more complex, right? Because everything is becoming more complex. Like AI has opened up a ton of opportunities. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when no one was using things like ChatGPT and Claude, and now it's like I can't even remember what my day was like before I didn't have access to these tools. So everything is changing rapidly. It becomes extremely complex. People are no longer wanting to be in positions where it's a singular decision maker, right? There's got to be a much bigger buying committee. You have to talk to a lot more people. You have to especially if it's like expensive software, right? If you're in the $1 million in terms of ARR for what you're selling, then that sales cycle is going to be long and it's going to be difficult. So, I think from that perspective, there is a need for both domain knowledge and technical knowledge in a way that wasn't as necessary before. It's not that it wasn't necessary, but I think it's just becoming so much more important now. And this is, the next article that I'm going to put out is going to focus on this, but I kind of alluded to it in the first one, is that I think there's a concept of a technical buyer now. So like I'm a big fan of MEDDIC and MEDPIC, and it talks about the economic buyer, that's the E. But I think that there's a technical buyer that's more than just a champion. It's not about, this person championing you to the economic buyer. It's about a decision gate. It's like you're going through the level boss to get to the final boss. And I think that dynamic makes things materially different. At least that's one of the things.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you on that. I'll say, even in my experience as a buyer or a consumer, when I buy different softwares, etc., like I don't necessarily want to be in like 7 different sales calls. Like I prefer to do my own research up front and then literally go to the whatever 2 to 3 companies that I feel most comfortable with and have one sales call, give me all the information, and then let's go ahead and either buy or not at that point. Now, obviously, I'm talking from a commercial perspective on enterprise sales. Like you said, the buying committee is like way bigger. but I'm sure that they probably have buyer and option exhaustion too at this point, because there's so much out there. Competition is probably at, I feel like we say this every year, but like at an all-time high, and AI is not making that any simpler. On that perspective, you mentioned something about technical buyers. So you say there's a difference between like a champion and a technical buyer. Can you break that down a little bit?
Sure. So, like, traditionally the champion is someone that goes to bat for you when you're not in the room, right? So you're convincing someone who's a stakeholder but not the decision maker, and this person is trying to convince the decision maker when you're not in the room. I think nowadays you have situations where there's a technical buyer that they can maybe love your software and you can convince them, but it's like what you're doing with the economic buyers, you're convincing them to sign on the line that is dotted. You have to do the same thing with the technical buyer. This is someone who is going to come at you with a skeptical eye. That's not going to be a lower level stakeholder, but someone who is potentially an executive. It could be a CIO, it could be a VP, but someone that actually needs to say yes and maybe even has their signature on the purchase order. I've been in situations where there's actually been multiple signatures. So you have the economic buyer is the ultimate authority that approves it, but you still have to have the person who is directly below them, which I think in many cases can be the technical buyer. And this person needs to see that the software that's being implemented is going to, first of all, it's going to do what it says it does from a technical perspective, right? At the end of the day, we want to sell the business impact. We want to sell the business decision makers, but there has to be a key technical stakeholder that says this is going to do what they say that it does. This is a lot of times, this is the person that actually validates the TCO, so goes into the numbers, right? Because if you're selling, like I sell cloud software, so our software, we're an ISV, we have it goes on top of cloud infrastructure. This all needs to be validated, and that role comes down to the technical buyer every time. Every single deal that I've been involved with, the person who is doing the TCO is, in my opinion, a technical buyer. So you will now have champions that will help sell to the technical buyer. But if you're in a position where you're making a decision, the way that you approach the vendor changes materially. So I think that is the key difference between someone who's a champion, who is saying, this is good for me, and someone who is actually a decision maker, because it's like the chair is kind of flipped, right? So ultimately, the technical buyer is going to champion you to the economic buyer by saying, yes, like this works, it's the right cost, they're not playing games with us, we can handle this software, our team can handle this software. But that's different, I think, than a champion that is actually, there's a good book called Selling With that I will plug here by Nate Nasrallah. And this talks about how to kind of build champions and sell with your champions within the company, so that when you're not there, they're actually making the case for it. And you're going to have to mobilize your champions to convince the technical buyer to pass that gate. And then you're going to have to mobilize them to convince the economic buyer as well. In many cases, the technical buyer will bring your champions with you to the meeting with the economic buyer to actually convince them too. So I do think it is more than just nuance. I actually think that this is something that companies need to go into with their eyes open and think about. It doesn't necessarily need to create a new acronym, but certainly I think it's a more key personality, and champion doesn't quite define it.
Yeah. So in a way, you're saying the technical buyer is a new champion for you inside the company.
It can't, ultimately they're going to have to be the ones to endorse you to the economic buyer, but I think that only happens after, maybe we could say that they change role to a champion once you've gotten that decision to go
their validation.
Until you get their buy-in, they are actually someone that you need to convince and that you need to sell to, and that champions need to convince, because at the end of the day, these personalities don't take your word for it ever, nor should they. They're going to take the word for it of the team. They're going to look at a TCO and validate it without you, right? Like if you're looking at a cloud calculator, does it match up with what the vendor gave you? So, maybe they flip at one point and become a champion, but there is, I think, a concept as a technical buyer that stands independently.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, very true. I wanted to ask, just to make sure we clarify for the audience, can you give us an example? And obviously don't use one of your own deals, but just an example of okay, the champion could be this type of title, and the technical buyer could be this type of title, just to give the audience a distinction.
Sure, absolutely. So let's say that you're selling to like a SaaS company, right? So like you're trying to sell some software to a company that has a SaaS product that they are then selling to, their own customers, right? So the technical buyer would be someone who owns that SaaS solution from a technology perspective. So everything that goes into that solution, what technology they use, what feature sets they can offer, that is going to be, probably like a CIO type of executive, or like, at the very least a VP, or like
Yeah.
head of SaaS product or something like that. And then their, boss, who's probably going to be the CEO or maybe a COO, but definitely an executive that is either at the top or one step below it. They're also going to have, that's the person who is actually going to have the budget that says, I'm going to approve this too. So it's like two signatures. So you're going to actually be selling most of the time, like 90% of the time, it's going to be to this technical buyer. And actually starting with this person, like you're trying to break into an organization, you don't necessarily need to start with the economic buyer in this particular instance. You can start with this, person, and then this person, you might not even meet the economic buyer. Honestly, they might know about you, but you may not even meet them if this person is, basically making the decision, but they're still going to have to get the signature, and that signature is still going to be ultimately what is going to pay your bill. And you will at one point have an interaction with them where, you're going to have to kind of make a convincing argument, and they may bring you in as well. So I think I don't think economic buyer really covers that personality. And especially if you're selling software like what I do, where we do target SaaS companies, I've seen it every time a distinct difference between these two personalities, and you have to be able to you have to be able to convince both of them. And the technical buyer becomes even more key in that aspect. And I think they get mislabeled as an economic buyer sometimes too. So, it's interesting, right? There's always differences. It depends a lot on what you sell and who you sell it to. But I feel pretty strongly about this, and I like the topic. It seems to be a bit controversial. So,
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that the buyers have changed in the way they make decisions. And, with all the software that's out there and everybody promising all these different things, it's probably also been burned before where, something it promises for you to do this, and then they start and it's like, oh, but it has, 1, 2, 3 limitations. And now all of a sudden they're in a 3-year contract. So I think it's true what you're saying, and probably very important nowadays with the way, AI is and all the softwares that are coming up to really validate the software and make sure that it does work for us, the company or who we're selling to, et cetera. On a different note, I actually made a post about this on LinkedIn a couple of days ago where I talked about how the SC role is changing. And I personally feel like, just from, talking to companies all the time, and they're obviously, hiring for SCs, which I help a lot with. But one of the things that I've seen kind of come up on the rise, not for every single company, right, but is that SCs will probably be at some point either required to know how to run a full cycle deal, or at least have knowledge of it, so that at the time where maybe an AE is not available or something happens, they know how to take over and end up closing the deal. I don't know what your perspective is on that, and I'd love to get your opinion. But I also wanted to ask, where do you feel like SEs and AEs really complement each other best when it comes to a deal that it's mainly complex and like enterprise level?
So that's a really interesting question. I have a lot of thoughts on this too. I think I want to separate two things. So if you're selling, software that is more commoditized or less complex or less expensive, I don't necessarily think this model that I'm going to present applies. But if you're selling complex enterprise software, right, that might be millions of dollars in TCV or ARR, hundreds of thousands of dollars in ARR even, then it is a very complex process, and it's probably a complicated technical product, right? If you're it tends, the things that are the biggest impact tend to be the most complicated, and there's a real need for technical background to be able to sell to that. So I think, from an SE perspective, and from my personal experience, I have taken deals from zero to closed. Like from, and I even dig for leads. Like I love hunting. I'm a hunter. A lot of what I do on my day-to-day is think about, potential new use cases, I use things like Sales Navigator and Zoom Info and Lusha, and I do background on companies, and I try and target different industries, and I do a lot of this stuff. So, and I'm my title is in pre-sales. So I think the need for technical acumen in these sales is absolutely critical across the board. And not only that, you have to be able to simplify the technical language into a business message. So you're not just going to be talking to low-level technical stakeholders or a technical buyer. You're also going to be talking to an economic buyer and explaining why this software is going to impact your business. And so you have to map the technology feature set that comes with the software to the business impact on whatever it is that you're impacting. Like we go after applications, so the application's impact to the business and how our technology enhances that. So I think that, I think there's just, honestly, I think the SEs of today and are really the $1 million AEs of tomorrow. I think if you're looking at a good dynamic between an AE and an SE, there's a lot of work on both ends of that coin, right? So I think that there's interchangeability, right? Like an AE needs to be able to have some level of ability to complement an SE, and an SE needs to have the ability to complement the AE. But my suggestion for AEs that want to kind of stay relevant, that aren't necessarily the most technical people, is industry focus. Like really know your industry, know what you're impacting across the industry. What are the problems that this industry is having? How does your software help solve those problems? Why should the people in positions to make decisions care about what you're saying? What is your business impact? And how can you speak the industry? I mean, you need to be an expert in industry. Like if I want to sell to, finance and banks and things like that, and I don't know anything about global payments or cross-border payments or things like ISO 222 or DORA, or the Cloud Act, or all these other things that are relevant to that industry that are top of mind from those business decision makers, then there's no reason for them to listen to me. So I think you want to, as an AE, you have to have a technical background that is solid. And I think that you also need to be an industry expert and focusing on, like, if it's more commoditized, it's less need to be as in depth, and it's more structured messaging, and commodities usually sell or they do not. So I think at big companies that sell software that is used widely by everyone, that isn't necessarily as expensive, that like a department head could approve without any sort of additional signature, is a different situation than a complex enterprise software. And in that sense, being able to understand MEDDIC so that you can have like a filter so that the things that you shouldn't invest your time in versus the things that you should invest your time in, that's really where MEDDIC becomes powerful, when you have a lot of inbound and you need to understand what to focus on. But in this situation, I think industry knowledge, like AEs that don't have industry knowledge or technical background, honestly, like what would you say you do here? To Office Space. I'm so old. These movies are old. Everything I'm saying is old.
That's funny. I will say I'll validate that, because even on my end, when I'm working with companies, most of the time they're looking for somebody that's specialized. And I agree with you that even if you don't have technical experience, the more you're able to stay in like one industry and one lane and get so good at it, companies are paying more for specialized knowledge versus somebody that's moved around from industry to industry, and it's like a do-it-all in all these aspects, but you don't really know it all. So yeah, I can definitely agree with that. On the other hand,
just add, one last point is like, the only way that you're going to sell $1 million software to someone is because they have an industry specific problem and they don't know how to deal with it, or they need you badly. It's not a nice to have at that point when you're at that level. And you have to know what their problem is. You have to understand how you solve it. And it's more than just like cost savings, right? Cost savings to me is commoditization. If all you're talking about is we're going to save you money, a lot of people don't, less people than you think care about that. Everybody says they want to save money. And it is certainly, kind of a negotiation tactic, right? It's got to save us money in some way. But most of the people, when you're selling like critical software, they care way more about how it's going to expand their business than they do about how, is it going to cost less than what I'm currently using.
Yeah, yeah, very true. I wanted to shift gears slightly into the world of AI, and you told me that you sit in your company's AI committee. Is there any big misconception that you see about AI right now replacing whether it's an AE or SE or just go to market roles in
I have
general?
no idea.
Yeah, I have to say, I think that AI replacing people in sales, SDRs, whatever, is
But master
absolutely,
conversation is
it is
regarding
not even remotely close to being at that level. Even if you're selling like some commoditized software, like you could put together a workflow that might reach out to people, but there is no way that it is actually replace. Like you're not going to put an AI agent in place of a human and think that
Yeah,
you're going to get anything accomplished. And if you're talking about like enterprise sales, again, million, 100, 7 figure type sales, zero chance, because no one wants to buy from an AI agent. No one thinks that an AI agent understands them. There is no relationship between a human and an AI agent. So I honestly think it is nonsense. I see it all over LinkedIn. I see all sorts of. The latest one that I thought was interesting was interviewing candidates with AI. I was curious to know what you think about that, because like if I ever went on an interview and it was with an AI agent, I'm pressing the red button and getting out of that interview immediately, because if I'm not worth their time to bring a human to talk to me, then it ain't worth my time either.
that's
But I
so
think
funny
that's
that you mentioned that. No, I agree. I think that the only time you can maybe get away with AI interviewing is if you're one of those big companies, like Google or Microsoft, and they're doing that initial screening because they have thousands and tens of thousands of applicants. But outside of that, especially as a startup, interviewing with AI is probably like exactly like you said. The experience I've had is that most candidates are going to say, if you're not going to value me, then I'm just going to move on to something else. So I think they're
yeah.
obviously needed within the process. Like you can help with workflows or, for example, automating rejections, which a lot of people still complain to this day that they just get ghosted by companies, which to me is insane because I feel like that's part of the reason why AI should be used for. But yeah, a lot of thoughts on that. It's a whole different podcast we need to do on. But
Yeah.
I was going to mention a funny story. I saw somebody on LinkedIn complain that they signed up with a AI SDR company that was basically going to replace our entire SDR team. And they didn't get any booked calls for their first 3 months. And they were trying to get out of the contract and they couldn't get out of the contract. And they signed a 3-year agreement with them. And he was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do because this literally sucks. So maybe a tip for anybody out there: don't sign 3-year agreements or something that you haven't tested or proven before with any sort of guarantees.
Well, there's a lot of hype, and we're human, and it's such a human response, FOMO,
Yeah.
like fear of missing out, right? So you think that, if I don't do this, I'm going to be obsolete, and then there's always the case of people that are lack empathy and think I want more money in my pocket and I'm going to save money, but it's really there are no shortcuts here. Like for startups, very, very, very rarely does a startup immediately gain traction. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of iteration from a lot of different people across a significant amount of time. You hear about the unicorns, you hear about the Wiz, right? It's the biggest deal that ever happened. Back in the day when I was starting out, Waze was a big one, right? Like an Israeli startup made a big splash, but that is like 0.0001% of the companies. If you have an exit that's like 500 million, and you're not a unicorn, it still can be very positive and very successful. So I think people have like a fear of missing out. But I will say this, like I think I used the analogy with you, and maybe it was even in the description for this, but it's AI is like watering a seed, right? Like the seed is still required. The seed is the human being. And if you have the right tool set and you understand how to use it, you can grow into a very big, formidable tree that is solid. And this is how you're going to differentiate yourself from everybody. Like I'm going to give you an example. I use 3 different LLMs every single day. So I use Copilot for work, and Copilot actually has Claude and other models built into it, including ChatGPT. And then I use Claude as kind of like my main personal one. And then I use ChatGPT for, I don't use Google anymore. So if it's something kind of simplistic that I don't care about, I'll go to ChatGPT so I don't use the tokens on Claude. But like if it's something that I need thoughtfulness for. I use Claude. For me, it is an enabler of like ideas. I have to speak if I want to get through a problem or solve something or figure something out. And it's good because I don't take everything that it tells me at face value. In fact, I'm very skeptical. And a lot of times I'll just tell maybe this is a bridge too far for people, but I named the AI, I just call it Athena, right? Athena is like the goddess of wisdom. I like Greek mythology. So I just refer to it as Athena because it makes it more, person that I can talk to and I can disagree with this, person. But this is what helps me, right? This is what differentiates. And it's like crazy how like productive it makes me because it helps me work through things that would take me so much longer on my own, or even if I'm to, one of my friends or a colleague, like the vast knowledge at the fingertips of Athena is enormous. So they can comment, she can comment on everything and I can have like a back and forth conversation. And then it triggers in my mind, what I think is good and what is not. And I kind of dig deeper into that. And like, it enables me. It brings creativity out of me. It brings ideation out of me. It is like the ultimate brainstorming capability. And that's, I think, the main power. And then, there's the stuff that's like, I never have to take meeting notes. And I'll tell you what, I was awful at doing that before anyway. So like using Facilitator with Teams, it's like insane. Like right when I got my hands on this, I immediately across the board implemented it. And, so I do a lot of stuff like that, right? So that there's the tedium that I don't have to deal with. This is kind of like the co-work AI space. But in my opinion, like the real power is in the enablement of creativity, of brainstorming, of research, and like the discussion that you can have, because it's really wild, like to be talking to something that's back to you as if it is human. I mean, it is crazy. And it's gotten so big in such a short time.
You're fine, absolutely. If I suspect that the is urgent, I will just drop it.
Question for you. Do you label, like, for example, Claude or he and like ChatGPT or she, or are they both she's? What's your dynamic?
Yeah. Whenever I talk to any AI, it's just I'm talking about Athena. So like I'll say Athena. Like, it helps me to treat it like a person. Honestly, I don't know if it's a good thing, but
I asked that
because there's a running joke in my company about it because I always call it.
I asked because I also personalized it. I didn't give them names, which probably I should, but I call Claude a she and like ChatGPT a he. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the way they were named. But I guess I posted about this on LinkedIn like a while ago, and people were like, "What do you mean you give them personalized like human factors?"
Human
and I was
nature.
like, "I don't know. I thought this was normal."
Yeah, I think it's great to do that. Like it's you know you're talking to a robot. Absolutely. Like there's no question about it, right? I'm
exactly.
But it just helps to address that. I mean, that's the point of an LLM, right? A large language model, a natural language model where you can speak in plain English and get plain English based responses. That's what it's supposed to do. So I just find it very helpful to do it that way.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing before we move on to our rapid fire section. But one thing I've also noticed is that it's not, you mentioned the aspect of, I don't want to waste my tokens on something that's kind of silly for Claude. And I've been on tons of leadership meetings and I'm part of leadership groups as well. And I know AI became like the hype and people are letting go of so many people and layoffs, for AI so companies can try AIs. And I don't know if you saw it, but Ford hired back like 300 of the people they laid off because AI couldn't do what they did. Shocker. And I've also had leaders within startups tell me that we're going back to hiring a human because tokens are too expensive. It's the equivalent of hiring a human, letting them do their thing. And also I don't have to manage them because as you probably noticed, once you're trying to build something, especially on Claude, somebody has to still manage it. Like you still need to be some sort of an expert or coder because you just don't, like, they're not going to do it right all the time. And then you just waste the time doing all these things that didn't lead to anything.
Totally. Like the best example I can say of AI and how it can enhance your company is like the Iron Man suit. It is complicated. It is advanced technology, but it can make you fly and it can do all sorts of great stuff. You still have to know how to use it. You still have to use it responsibly. You still, but it's not going to do it on its own, right? Like, it's really a good example because there's in the movies, they actually have scenes where the suits themselves go and do something, but it's directed by a person. It's not just going and making decisions. Like, you're still, and what's the guy? Jeeves? Jeeves is like an LLM, right? In the suit that Tony Stark has. So, that's kind of the way that I look at it. It can definitely enhance your workforce, but it's not the easiest. Like, I would say, if you want to differentiate yourself, especially in sales, learn how to use these tools effectively and do a lot of trial and error. And the best way to do it is to just start talking to it. And if you do that, you will kind of find your way. I think curiosity and creativity are worth their weight in gold in sales, especially in startups. And if you can leverage AI tools well, you can blow people's mind. Like, when this whole thing started and I started using this, I gave a presentation at one of the QBRs in my company, and people were like losing their minds because they didn't realize that, like, you could do this type of stuff with it. And that wasn't that long ago, and now everybody is doing this, and it's like on to the next thing. So the form multiplier here is significant, but you do have to put effort. You do have to understand how it works. And it is not the Batmobile. You can't just be like, to the Batmobile, and then everything is going to take care of itself. Like, it's still, it takes time and effort, and it takes human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. All right. I can't believe we're already at the rapid fire section, but these are fast questions. They don't have to be short answers. What is one tool that you can't live without right now, but you can't say AI because we just talked about the LLMs?
Oof, because that was my answer. I literally can't live without LLMs, but like,
if you had to pick something else.
Honestly, LinkedIn. Like, LinkedIn gives me a huge amount of insight. LinkedIn, like, paired with Sales Navigator too, because a lot of times, like, I'll have theories about use cases or about industries, and I'll go to LinkedIn to try and prove it out. I'll look at different personalities, profiles, posts. I'll try and look at different companies and see what the roles are at these companies and if they match up with my theory. I think there's a lot of garbage on LinkedIn. Like, honestly, it can be like the worst social media ever. But if you kind of dig through that nonsense, then you can find a lot of finding you on LinkedIn, I thought was incredibly insightful. And I thought that you had a lot of great posts. So I'm on LinkedIn every single day. So it's really, and every job I've gotten is literally from LinkedIn. This job that I have was from LinkedIn. The AWS job, someone reached out to me on LinkedIn. Like, the job that moved me to Israel was LinkedIn. Like, I got a message from a recruiter, and a month later I was living in Israel. So talk about life changing. So
yeah. It's a very, I wouldn't say underrated tool, because I know people now use it to the full potential, but I will say a lot of people have love-hate relationships with it. But I think it just comes down to, like you said, they let the garbage stuff get in their head, and, they get distracted or et cetera, which it happens to everybody once in a while. But if you use it to its full potential, it's a very, very powerful tool.
Yeah, I once saw a LinkedIn post that said, if you fail at business, just succeed. And I mean, if that's not like the ethos of LinkedIn, I mean, it's like, I saw another post from someone who was like in the hospital because they overworked themselves, and they made this long post about how they were in the hospital. And the last thing that this person said was, the takeaway was that they need to work harder. Like, they're in the hospital posting on LinkedIn for that. So, I mean, it gets wild out there. I'll tell you, it does get wild.
For sure. I've seen some crazy posts. I've seen some the funniest one I've seen to this day probably is a startup company out of San Francisco, where they had tents in their office, and young founders, maybe in their early 20s. And this guy had posted just a picture, basically in his pajamas, in the office while they're sleeping in tents. And he was like, looking for people to join my startup. If you like this type of grind, come join me. And I was like, what the hell is going on?
Toxic work environment. That's what that is.
So yeah, it can definitely get very wild. All right. Second question. What is the biggest growth lever for SaaS in 2026?
Like, if you can figure out how to impact your product with AI, I mean, that literally, it ain't easy. It is not easy. It is not simple, not even a little bit. But And everybody wants to talk about AI, but if you can figure out how to make a material impact on what you offer through AI, and I don't mean like service-wise, right? Like, I think from a coding perspective, you can't replace coders. Like massive companies like Facebook, it's a bit of a different story, but startups, like you're going to have bad coders make bad code that senior people are going to have to rewrite. Like, but if you're good at coding, like remember the seed analogy, it can greatly enhance your code. If you're doing more to take care of more technical debt and then focusing on feature sets and things like that, or using AI agents to do something in either an active way or in an agentic way that materially impact, I'll give you an example in finance. Right now, like payments, it's driving huge revenue growth for banks and instant payment, and like wanting to think about it, right? If you send money to a friend, you want it to be instantly available. It used to be that you'd wire it to them and it would take them, a couple days or something like that. If it's a big amount, it could take longer. So one thing that these banks have to do now, especially from a compliance perspective, is they have to have an in-flight fraud check. So before the transaction can come back and say it is acceptable, or for it to go through, you have to have a fraud check that gives you a risk profile that if you're above a certain number, it ends the transaction or flags it for further review or delays it. So an AI agent here can come in and do this intelligently across multiple risk models, and you can build out a specific model just for this. And then you can have like an agentic AI service that goes and scans all of your transactions after the fact to see if there's anything there. And you can like conversationalize your data to say, you can actually talk and say, hey, what transactions have we flagged that look fraudulent? So, this can help provide better services, faster services from banks to their customers, for banks to leverage things like instant payments, for them to leverage cross-border payments, which have now been enabled through ISO 20022. So and this is like, I'm like talking about one little, area of use cases.
Yeah.
There's a way that this can impact every single SaaS company, but they need to do it in a way. They can't just. You have to put effort. Like everybody wants to not put effort. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what it is. You have to put effort. You will be able to do more, right? Infinitely more, right? Like the invention of the wheel allowed you to do a lot more. You still had to put a lot of effort into carrying whatever from wherever. But now instead of only being able to go, 10 feet, you can now go 10 miles or, 10,000 miles. So it always comes down to enabling you to do more. But it still takes lots of effort. So the effort is what people always forget, right? The effort that it used to take you to walk a mile versus the effort that it takes you to drive 100 miles, right? That once you're enabled, you forget about that effort that now that I can go 100 miles, it's like I don't even remember what it was like to not be able to do that. But it still takes effort and it still has to be done responsibly. So that's, and AI is making everybody crazy because it's like you can talk to this thing, right? So it's hard to deal with. I get that, but there's always effort.
I mean, I get annoyed now when I don't get an answer in like 0.4 seconds versus
Me too. Or
I'm like, what's taking so long?
Answer that I don't like, I get real annoyed.
Yeah,
like you're battling on. I need you to give me some concise summaries here.
Yeah, that's so funny. One in a way bonus question, but what have you had any like bad hiring decisions and what did you learn most from it?
Yeah, I mean, so I've hired a lot of people in my career. I've done way too many interviews. I've made some, actually early on in my career, I became like a manager pretty early. I think it was like 24. And I made a real poor hiring decision that really like affected a lot of different things. And I think like at the end of the day, it depends on what you're hiring for, of course, right? There's context. And I'll put it into like, current context, like with sales and SEs and, pre-sales and salespeople. I think that in sales, you are always supposed to have all the answers. Like you got to be able to navigate a conversation that goes south on you. You have to be audible ready. You have to have command of the message, all these different buzzwords that people in sales like to use. But at the end of the day, like you need someone that can admit when they don't know something, because the difference between someone who understands what they don't know and someone who's just trying to tell you what you want to hear is significant. And when you put that person in front of like a customer, right, then they're gonna try and BS their way to the finish line. Whereas if you don't know and you can acknowledge it, then there's ways to talk about, you know, I will get you an answer, or I need to circle back, whatever it is that you need to do. But I think that I think you have to be someone that can be honest with yourself, you know, and you aren't afraid to make a mistake. I honestly think that is the number one most important thing to hire for. It is that you are like, you'll go into an interview, you'll ask someone like a question, and I've done a lot of technical interviews, and people just give me answers that are wrong, and they don't know that, you know, they're hoping that it's right, but they don't know. Instead of saying, I don't know, but maybe it's this, they go in and they try and, you know, speak with confidence. That is no good, right? So if you're doing that, you also, if you get by that gate that way, you don't have curiosity to figure it out either. So, you know, I need someone that wants to be creative, that wants to be curious, that wants to learn. We're learning all the time. I learn something new on every single deal that I go through. I learn something new with every single personality that I deal with. If I can't admit that I don't know everything to myself, and I can't be honest with myself, then everything flows kind of downwards from there. So, you know, that is no question the most important thing. I'll take someone that has less skill. Skill can be learned. Skill can be earned. I'll take someone that has less skill.
But they have the willingness.
Yes. Yeah. We need, you know, sales is competition, right? You gotta have drive. You gotta want to figure it out at all costs. I'm a hunter. I want to go hunting. I want to figure it out. So,
if I had to summarize, I feel like hiring in 2026 would be in 2 words: would be curiosity and just the ability to figure it out. I feel like the 2 number 1 skill sets that everybody is hiring for, and rightfully so because of the world we're in. But I couldn't agree more.
Curiosity and drive.
Yeah, curiosity and drive, correct. On the hiring section, and I know you just spoke about it, but is there any certain like red flags that kind of jump out to you when you're interviewing somebody that you know for sure, like this person is not going to work out here?
I think like not being able to handle nerves, like someone that is talking very fast, that isn't comfortable. It says a lot about how they are in terms of this job. Like if this job is a reach for them or not a reach for them. I think also like being able to design, for an SE, I think the most important thing is design ability. So like I want to have conversations where I actually see the thought process play out in real time. And that is how I kind of test for the comfort level of the person. Because if I'm comfortable with my skills and someone asks me to design something that I maybe haven't designed before, then I'm okay with showing how my thought process works, how I move through that problem, and what questions I might ask, you know, versus someone who is speaking fast, doesn't take a break, doesn't ask a question. You know, so I want to understand how people break down problems, how people deal with scenarios that they weren't necessarily expecting. You know, so I think that's kind of like, I really like organic interviews. Like I really hate question and answer type stuff.
Yeah, like the Q&A.
Yeah, like honestly, people will always talk about like MEDDIC, like do you understand MEDDIC and whatever, but MEDDIC is an acronym that is super easy to learn. But like to put it in play, in practice, you don't necessarily have to know what the acronym is to be able to commit, you know, to run a sales cycle, especially at a startup. Because like startups don't need MEDDIC as much as big corporations. Like if you have a fire hose of, you know, leads coming in from marketing, from channels, from alliance, then MEDDIC helps you screen for what you should actually address and kind of get the noise out of the way, versus a startup where like you really don't know your market, you don't know your ideal customer profile, like you're kind of guessing and you need to make decisions on the fly. So that's why I always use that type of interview style if I'm looking for someone in this space.
I love that. I don't think anybody's ever said that, and I think it's a very underrated not tactic, but advice in terms of like, especially in this case, we're hiring for customer facing roles. So you're not knowing how to negotiate your own emotions and, navigate them through. And when you're speaking, et cetera, your confidence level, that obviously says a lot. And especially for enterprise deals, I mean, they'll probably eat you alive if you show up like that on these big, multi-enterprise type corporations. So
trust, like if they don't trust you, they're never going to trust someone that they think is telling them what they want to hear. I mean, that's why you constantly hear the stereotype of salespeople just kind of like being like used car salesmen, like, telling you greasy salesperson. Like, it's because there is some truth to it, right? Where salespeople are trying to paint the prettiest picture without any sort of problems, but that's not really how business works. Business is messy. Like, business is real messy, and being successful at business takes a lot of everything. It's not, you're not like, you don't get on a electric train that goes 500 miles per hour, right? You building that train, you started out with a train that was very dirty, that was coal based, that, and then it took a long time to get to that. So a lot of people think there are shortcuts. A lot of people think that they can just kind of walk their way into everything. And like I said, the good old boys club of sales, I think, is dead. And, being comfortable with yourself is what gives people confidence in you and trust in you. And you got to believe in what you sell. Like, I could never work for a company where their product is something that I don't believe in.
Yeah, so true. And I think this is a perfect timing to just end our episode. And thank you so much for coming in and sharing all your journey, your value, and just everything that you're going through right now. There's honestly so much notes to take from this episode. I always like to say that if you didn't have the ability to take the notes live, make sure to bring in your note taker so that you can take proper notes and actually implement everything that you just shared. But I thank you so much. And where can if anybody wants to connect with you, where can they find you? What's the best way? Is it LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn. It's just my profile is, I guess I got in early. So it's LinkedIn/IN/Ori Weizman. And that's my profile. So check me out there. I got some articles that I write. I do some posts. Send me a DM. I love talking to people about anything and everything.
Love that. And of course, we'll always put in the show notes as well to make it easy for everybody. But thank you again. It was a pleasure. And see you all on the next episode.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Take care.